She just wanted a quiet meal, nothing more. But inside that diner, laughter turned cruel, and a young girl in a wheelchair became the target of merciless bullies. The walls echoed with mockery, yet no one stepped in. Minutes felt like hours, every second heavier than the last. And then, the door opened. What followed wasn't just a confrontation. It was a moment that revealed something much bigger about cruelty, silence, and justice. The question is, when hatred rises, who will dare to stand against it? It started as just another afternoon. The diner buzzed with the usual sounds, dishes clinking, coffee pouring, small-town chatter filling the air. At a corner table sat Emma, a quiet teenager who lived most of her life in a wheelchair. She loved coming here, not because it was fancy, but because it made her feel normal. A milkshake, a notebook, and the comfort of routine. That was her world, simple and safe. To most, she was invisible, just another customer in the crowd. But to Emma, these moments mattered. They were her reminder that she wasn't defined by her disability, that she had a place where she could belong. She watched the door, waiting for her milkshake, unaware that her calm routine was about to shatter. Not everyone in that diner saw Emma the way she saw herself. Some looked at her with pity, others with impatience, and a few with something far darker. That afternoon, a group of young men swaggered in, loud, arrogant, and hungry for attention. The kind who laughed too loud, shoved past waitresses, and scanned the room for their next target. Emma kept her head down, focusing on her milkshake. But the truth was, the moment those boys walked in, her world had already changed. She just didn't know it yet. The moment the group of young men walked in, the atmosphere shifted. Their laughter was loud, but it wasn't joyful. It was sharp, cutting, meant to be heard by everyone. They didn't head straight to a table. Instead, they slowed their steps, scanning the room like predators choosing prey. And when their eyes landed on Emma, sitting quietly in her wheelchair with her milkshake, their smirks grew wider. At first, it was small. A whispered joke, a snicker that carried across the diner. One nudged the other, nodding in her direction. Emma tried to ignore it, lowering her gaze to her notebook, but she could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her. It wasn't just her wheelchair they mocked, it was the very idea of her existing in their space. Then it escalated. One of them coughed loudly, exaggerating the sound of wheels squeaking. Another mimicked her movements, dragging his feet as if he were crippled, while the rest burst into cruel laughter. The room grew colder, yet no one moved. Customers glanced nervously, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats, but none dared to speak up. The silence of bystanders was deafening. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for her milkshake, trying to steady herself. But they weren't done. One of the boys swaggered closer, leaning over her table, his shadow swallowing her completely. He snatched her straw and waved it like a trophy, mocking her in front of the entire diner. His friends howled, enjoying the spectacle, and then came the moment that pierced deeper than any insult. He placed his hand over her mouth, silencing her before she could even protest. The gesture wasn't just cruel, it was humiliating, a declaration that her voice didn't matter. Emma's eyes widened in shock, tears threatening to spill, but she refused to let them see her break. The diner froze. Waitresses paused mid-step. Customers stared but quickly looked away, pretending not to see. The air grew thick with discomfort, but still, no one rose to stop it. And in that suffocating silence, the cruelty grew bolder. Emma's heart pounded against her chest. Every second felt like an eternity. The walls that once brought her comfort now closed in like a prison. Fear tangled with rage. How could people just sit there and watch? How could no one care? And then, the bell above the door jingled. A sound so ordinary, yet in that moment it felt like a crack of thunder. The bullies barely noticed, too wrapped up in their performance. But Emma saw them, the silhouettes that stepped inside. Broad shoulders, heavy boots, leather jackets glinting under the diner lights. Bikers. Their presence was impossible to ignore. They didn't smile. Didn't joke. They stood still, their expressions carved with steel, eyes locked on the scene unfolding before them. The laughter of the bullies faltered for the first time. The room held its breath. Emma's tears shimmered in the light, her straw still clutched in the bully's hand, his palm hovering near her face. And in that split second, Before anyone could move, one question burned hotter than all the rest. What would happen when Justice finally walked through that door? The diner seemed to stop breathing. The bullies froze mid-laughter, their arrogance faltering as the heavy steps of the bikers echoed across the tiled floor. Boots against linoleum, slow, steady, deliberate. Every sound was a warning. The leader of the group, a towering man with steel-gray eyes, locked his gaze on Emma. Not with pity, but with recognition, an unspoken promise that she was no longer alone. Then his eyes shifted to the young men still crowding her table. The air crackled with unspoken tension. One of the bullies tried to laugh it off, tossing Emma's straw back onto the table like nothing had happened, but his voice cracked under the weight of the silence. Another shuffled backward, suddenly unsure of his own bravado. Yet the leader of the pack, the one who had covered Emma's mouth, stood rigid, his pride forcing him to hold his ground. For Emma, the moment stretched into eternity. Her heart raced, fear tangled with a surge of something new, hope. She could see it in the faces around her. The same bystanders who once looked away were now riveted, watching as justice materialized before them. The bikers didn't need to shout. Their very presence was enough. A single step forward, and the bullies recoiled. Another step, and their bravado crumbled. The cruel laughter that had filled the diner only minutes before was replaced by silence so sharp it could cut glass. Emma's tears finally fell, not from fear, but from release. For once, she wasn't invisible. For once, cruelty had met something stronger. And in that electric moment, when arrogance met justice, the world inside that diner shifted forever. Because the question was no longer whether Emma would endure their cruelty, it was what those bullies would do now that they were outnumbered, outmatched, and exposed. The tension broke not with violence, but with surrender. One by one, the bullies backed away, their laughter replaced by silence and shame. The leader, the same boy who had tried to silence Emma, dropped his gaze, unable to meet the eyes of the bikers or the girl he had mocked. In that moment, his power dissolved. What felt unstoppable only minutes earlier crumbled in the presence of people unwilling to let cruelty stand. Emma sat trembling but not broken. For the first time that afternoon, she breathed freely. The bikers didn't need to speak. Their presence was enough to shift the balance. They didn't just protect her, they reminded everyone watching that silence can be just as cruel as the act itself. As the bullies slipped out of the diner, whispers began to rise. Customers who had once turned away now exchanged guilty glances, realizing they had been witnesses to injustice and chosen to do nothing. And Emma, though shaken, sat taller, her strength shining in the space where humiliation had tried to take root. But this story is bigger than a diner, a milkshake, or even Emma herself. It's about what happens every day when cruelty is allowed to grow unchecked, when people look away instead of standing up. Racism, discrimination, humiliation, they thrive in silence. So the question becomes, how many more Emmas will sit alone, mocked, ignored, until someone chooses to act? And when the moment comes, will we be the ones who turn away, or the ones who walk through the door? Because justice doesn't always roar in with fists or fury. Sometimes it arrives with the courage to simply stand.